Good morning and welcome to our Perfect Circle webinar on the circular economy. My name is David Staniforth and I'm a director of AECOM and Perfect Circle. And to put this session into some context, Perfect Circle is a joint venture from three consultancy organisations, AECOM, Gleeds and Pick Everard. We were delighted to be awarded the replacement framework, escape framework, consultancy framework at the beginning of this year. It's a massive framework and a significant framework for us. It offers huge flexibility in terms of sector scope, from aviation through to wastewater. It covers England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and a huge range of project sizes. The smallest one we will be doing generally around about a few thousand, up to tens of millions. And so we believe it offers you as clients probably one of the most flexible, compliant procurement routes to source consultancy services. Now, as Perfect Circle, our commitment to Scape on the framework is to bring clients like yourselves great ideas and to put sustainability at the heart of everything that we do. Now, as a society, we are committed to looking at a more intelligent use of the limited natural resources that we have available to us. And I believe that in the construction sector, we are acutely aware of the significant proportion of those resources that are used in the construction process and potentially used to generate waste. Now, out of that thought process, the model of the circular economy has been developed. Now, I'm delighted that within the ranks of AECOM and Perfect Circle, we have David Cheshire. David will be delivering our key talk this morning. David is a recognised and acknowledged authority on the circular economy and has written pretty much one of the reference works on the subject called Building Revolutions. David will be taking us through an overview of the circular economy, the principles, and as a fairly practical engineer, I hope, will be taking us through how those principles are applied to real case studies. So I hope that you will find it both interesting and informative. In terms of the running order, we will be about 40 minutes with David. And then during that time, because it's a live webinar, you're obviously muted. If you could type your questions into the Q&A live chat, which I think you'll probably find about here on the screen, type them in, and then we've got a time at the end to go through them. So those questions obviously about circular economy, but if there are questions about either Scape or Perfect Circle, feel free, type them in, and we'll do our best to answer them. So I'm sure that you've thought that's enough for me. I'm now going to hand you to David Cheshire for our keynote speech. David, over to you.
Brilliant, thanks, David. Brilliant to be here and great to be talking about this subject. So what I wanted to do is, as Dave said, was just give you a quick overview of the circular economy, what it means, what the principles are for design, and then I want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing and what the GLA have been doing to implement the circular economy policies in London and how that might impact on other parts of the country. So the basic premise here is that we're at the moment busy just digging, mining and processing huge amounts of raw materials and stealing them out of the planet. And this is for example, mining bauxite to make aluminium, digging out the Amazon rainforest and all the consequences that has in terms of our biodiversity and everything. And actually, it was really interesting seeing there was a UN report out last year that said that 50% of greenhouse gas emissions are associated with actually winning and processing materials and resources. And so, you know, we always think about it's going to be operational energy use and that's the thing we've been focusing on. But actually, this is where the massive impact is. And in terms of it's 90% biodiversity loss is associated with winning resources and mining and farming and all the things that we do to the planet. And at the other end of the scale, we are busy knocking down buildings at a phenomenal rate. So, you know, we are demolishing buildings sometimes within 30 years, certainly within 50 years in our cities. And the trouble is that although we, as an industry, we say we're doing great because we've got 80–90% recycling of these resources and materials. Actually, it's not what I would call recycling, because we don't maintain the value of those resources. They're always downcycled. So actually what we're doing is all this structural concrete will be knocked down and crushed and used as secondary aggregates, maybe for road bases or maybe for piling mats, but it won't become structural concrete again. So it's it's really important that we define our terms, I think, and even structural steelwork is often downcycled into rebar here, as you can see here. So it's all a very crude process and very it's not giving us our raw materials back that we've spent all this effort and time to win. So that's very much the linear economy, where we're digging stuff out of the ground, we're using it for a while, and then we're throwing it away. So the idea of the circular economy, so this diagram builds up, but I'll briefly explain what the basic concepts are, and then I'll go through in more detail. So the idea is that in those inner three circles that we're retaining, refitting, refurbishing our buildings. So rather than building new, if we can, because the resource use is so intense, and then if we can reclaim and remanufacture our components, our bits of the building. So can we I mean, the salvage industry is very low at the moment. We very rarely reclaim bits of the buildings, apart from the odd, chimney pots and Belfast sinks and a few things, but very little of that is going on anymore. Remanufacturing, there's lots of opportunities to remanufacture building services and all that complex kit that we currently just throw away and shred, and we have to deal with all the consequences of that waste. And then lastly is the idea that we recycle, as a last resort, we're recycling the technical materials, which is the metals and plastics, in one closed loop. So the idea is it goes from manufacture into use and then back to the manufacturer again, and that doesn't happen in the construction industry at all. It's very low levels of return to manufacturer. And then on the biological cycle, which is the other loop, is it goes, so things like timber and fabrics go from the biosphere into use, and then they gradually make their way back to the biosphere, hopefully by a few different uses on the way, but they're not contaminated and don't have toxins in them and that sort of thing, that we and they can return to be either composted or anaerobically digested. And so that's the sort of basic concept. And then on that, in terms of the construction industry, is in terms of design, there's a set of design principles which I'll briefly touch on and give you some examples of how that works. And then round the outside is actually more conceptual, and this idea that circular business models is one thing that we've been looking at, and a lot of people have been looking at as well, to say, do we have to buy everything? Can we sort of pay per use, like we're starting to do with things like with cars and our phones and even jeans now? You can lease a pair of jeans and and have a nice worn out pair of jeans that look cool and wear those for a while and then give them back, and you don't have to buy and consume stuff and then be responsible for the whole life of that component. And then around the top there is this idea that waste is a resource, and fundamentally, as designers and as a society, we've created this concept of waste. So in nature, there's no such concept of waste. So from one system that might be what would appear to be a waste out of one system becomes a resource or a nutrient for another system. So manure out of the back of a cow becomes the nutrients for the meadow to grow again, and there's all those processes and microbes and all sorts of things that are busy sorting out all that waste and reprocessing it. So actually, if we're not thinking about the next life of the building, the component, the element, the material, when we're designing something, we are basically that's destined to be waste. And then local authorities and others are then quite often responsible for dealing with that. And there's that transfer of responsibility from designer, contractor, operator of the building, and then demolition contractor and then end of life, which sort of seems to sort of fall down the chain, and then there's no real sort of loop, which is really what we're trying to get into now. So that's the basic premise. So I'll just run through a few of the design principles now. So one is building in layers, and this is a sort of underlying principle. So if you're looking at mobile phones, that sort of things, then they have a short life, and you can see how you might design that. And this one is actually designed for disassembly. So this is a shift phone in from Germany, which can actually be taken apart, and you can upgrade it and put new batteries in, and even upgrade the cameras or whatever you want to do. And so you can see how that model can work, because it's just one component, but actually buildings are made of thousands and thousands of components, and all of them have very different lifespans, particularly. So the structure might be around for 100 years, but the interiors might be around for 2 or 3 years. If it's a retail outlet or something, might be stripped out and replaced. And so we need to apply different circular economy models to that. So we might say the structure is long life, loose fit. So it might be around, let's say it is around for 100 years rather than demolished because it becomes obsolete. And then the interiors, you might think, well, can we reconfigure those rather than having to throw everything out and start again? Can we have different leasing models that allow people to take on office space from someone else and keep the interiors, or reconfigure the interiors rather than chucking everything out, putting it in the skip and returning it to base build, and then having to put their own, whole new set of resources in. And the other thing I think was useful about the building in layers, and we'll come on to this when we talk about the policy as well, is that actually allows you to peel off different layers, is the idea. So if you want to put a new facade on, it allows you to do that. So you could maybe convert a building from an office into residential, where you might not want floor to ceiling glazing, and it allows you to get to those building services that might be traditionally covered up with finishes that are I don't know, ceramic tiles that might have a 2,000-year life, and you've put behind that something that only has a 20-25-year life and might maybe need replacing, so it has to be smashed to bits to get through to it. So the idea of that peeling layers. So and that relates to all of these other principles, particularly adaptability and disassembly. So in terms of design for adaptability, now this is a really interesting topic, and I did quite a lot of research on this, and looking at what architects had found, and really was really clear that buildings like this have been with us for over 100 years. Victorian warehouses and Georgian townhouses are the classic examples of adaptable buildings that have done really well. And actually, there's quite a lot of commonality around these that the architects who were looking at found that they're quite often rectangular plan form, which makes it very simple, nice clear floor plates that allows you to change it into different uses. They typically have pretty generous floor to ceiling heights, and that classic sort of architectural thing that you all see in grand designs around, sort of great space, great feeling, and great light. And these sorts of buildings have that sort of good balance between daylight without overglazing and everything. And the other one, of course, is that they're typically that stick around are the buildings that people love. And again, this came out of the research. People like this building, and this is the King's Cross building, and it's the jewel in the crown for the redevelopment, Argent redevelopment of King's Cross, that area around there. And they wanted, when I spoke to them, they said they wished to add more buildings like this to be actually the sort of the centre points for buildings. But even buildings that look like they should probably be demolished and would often be demolished, it doesn't have to be. So this is really interesting. This is one of the case studies we found that where Make Architecture and the structural engineers were bidding for the project, and the developer had assumed that this was going to be knocked down and they were going to start again, but they pitched in with the idea of, hey, no, actually we think we can keep this building, we're going to turn it into this. So actually they conceived that and actually came up with a whole design around actually keeping the base, the structure, the foundations of the building, and then actually creating more space by infilling the sort of spaces between the H blocks and actually restoring an existing building. And that's really important now when we're going for net zero. As you see from this graph, so what I've tried to illustrate here is a sort of 30-odd years life of a building. Up the side here is the embodied carbon. So kilograms, typically new steel and concrete buildings are around 1,000 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per meter squared. And then over the life of the building, let's assume this is an all-electric building. It's pretty efficient. It's doing pretty well. And actually, because it's all electric, the electricity grid is decarbonising over time, or is projected to decarbonise over the time as we get more renewable technologies, so wind farms, etc., coming into play, and that's going pretty well at the moment in the UK. So actually, you get a very, very efficient building that gets more carbon. Better from carbon emissions perspective over time, and this is a kick up when we refurbish, let's say. And then if you compare that to a refurbishment versus a new build, if you keep, like the previous example, if you keep the structure, the main structure, so the bones of the building and the foundations, there's around 50% of the embodied carbon emissions are locked up in those elements. So actually you're starting at a much lower point, and actually if you do what they've done here, this building is actually pretty efficient, and you make it all electric. Let's say you replace the facades and you replace all the building services, you're still going to get a pretty efficient building, and there isn't a crossover point. So it used to be the argument that we'll build new because it'll be much more efficient, we'll save loads of energy, we'll save loads of carbon, and that's the right thing to do. But now actually that has switched, and actually we're better off from a whole life carbon perspective, keeping existing buildings and refurbing and doing a deep refurbishment of our buildings. And then just in terms of adaptability, these are just some examples of kind of the sort of things that you would look at, as I said before, floor to ceiling heights, where you put the cores and that sort of thing. And we've been using that, and scenario modeling as well is something else that we've been looking for as part of demonstrating the adaptability when we're looking at that from a GLA perspective, to see, can you show how the building could be changed into different uses? Does it work? And if not, can you tweak the design a little bit? Can you shift the cores a little bit so that you can get the escape routes for the fire or whatever? And that's something we've been doing for this project, where we've been, this is Moorfields Eye Hospital with UCL, and we've been looking at actually how we make the building adaptable and able to be used and extend the life of it for as long as possible. So those are sort of some of the key principles. Design for disassembly is a really tricky one, and there's not many projects that are really doing this as a wholesale level. I think it's going to take a big change in what we're doing. But there are some examples. There are some buildings that are completely demountable. So this is an example, and we've looked at Place Ladywell and a few other examples where we've actually been creating buildings that actually are on meanwhile sites. They're earmarked for redevelopment in five or 6 years time, but in the meanwhile we've managed to put some homes on there for people who haven't had anywhere to live, and these are designed to be relocated. So you can do it at the building scale. And what's interesting about that as well is actually you can disconnect the value of the building as an asset from the value of the site, which I think is a really slightly mind-bending idea, that up to now all our buildings have been locked into the value of the site, which means as the value of the site goes up versus the quality of the building, you end up getting obsolete and demolishing the building and building a new one. But then equally, this whole disassembly and reconfiguration idea can go right down to the detail. So I've got several examples of products that are out there that are already get rid of wet trades, so they don't need sealants and adhesives and stuff, and can be laid dry, which means you can move them around and reconfigure them, but also disassemble them and reclaim the bits back. And this was a nice example that Google have been implementing on their projects, and AHML and the architects have called it the Jack system, and it basically is designed so that the facilities managers can come in and reconfigure the spaces, create new AV rooms or whatever it is, or meeting spaces without having to smash everything down with sledgehammers and crush up all that blockwork or plasterboard and everything, and then create loads of waste and then have to build new. And then lastly, for the principles, this is about selecting materials is really key to the circular economy, and it's something that we need to be doing as an industry, we need to be thinking much earlier about the materials that we're procuring rather than leaving it sort of down the supply chain. And there's some really exciting new materials out there, and I just love this one. So this is by Biome, which is mycelium insulation. So you grow the insulation, and mycelium is the sort of the root structure and the fibers that are associated sort of typically underground with funguses and mushrooms. And it basically it's fed on, it's grown in the factory, it's fed on waste from the agricultural industry, and what's incredible about it is I'd highly, if you do nothing else, I'd highly recommend this clip. The BBC clip, and what the woman does here is she tries to set this on fire. So she gets the old burner underneath it going for quite some time actually, and on the top here is a chalk ice. So actually she put a chalk ice on top, and not when she's finished, not only does it not melt, it actually, when she lifts it up, there's no chocolate residue on the surface at all. And just incredible, I think, that is this grown material, which is naturally self-extinguishing. So all these issues around the insulations and the problems we're having with insulants, we've got a potential solution here that has better U values and better performance than PIR, PUR insulations that we're typically using, and it sequesters carbon. So it's actually locking in carbon into its structure rather than it emitting loads of carbon in its when it's being manufactured. So incredible materials, and these are sort of things I think where we need to be heading. And then at far basic level, but actually just don't believe why we're not doing this more. So these are from a site I walked past recently, which was these are raised floor tiles. So if you're sitting in an office or you go into your office, you've got those raised floor tiles, 600 by 600 mil, standard product, pretty strong actually. But what you don't want to do is leave them outside in the rain, because they start to warp and decay. They've got a composite timber inner, and then they're coated in steel. So galvanized steel. So this is what they can look like. I thought maybe they were going to reclaim these, but they left them outside, so they can't. But I'm going to advertise these guys because there is only one manufacturer in the UK that I know of doing this, called RMF, and they are reclaiming the floor tiles. So they'll come and get them from the site when they're tearing them all out. There's thousands of these things in the building. They will clean them up. They on the right there, this is their test them, so they do the edge testing and everything like that. They re-warranty them, which is absolutely critical, because that's the thing that differentiates a reclaimed product from a new one. Typically is, everyone will say, well, I can't use this because there's no warranty. This has the warranty, and it has the supply. They have over 100,000 in stock at any one time, and they're getting them all the time. And they even better, they sell them back at 3/4 of the price of new ones. So actually you're getting a cheaper product, tested. Some of the older ones are actually better quality as well. They say they're actually stronger than the newer ones that have been, they were sort of over-engineered. And you obviously get, whatever it is, I think it's a fifth of the carbon emissions associated with new ones, because obviously you're reclaiming a product that just needs remanufacture. So, and just imagine if we could apply that to lots more things that happens in our buildings. And then sort of lastly, around the outside, the circular business models, waste resource, just give you a couple of examples. So a really cracking one, I think, is similar to the previous example, where actually there's organisations like Paint 360 and there's others who take waste paint from the construction industry, so leftover paints from the construction industry, and they use that as their raw material to make new paint. So basically they remanufacture it, and as it says here, they're actually using, they're getting long-term unemployed people into work in the process. So it's a social enterprise, so it's just doing loads of really great things, and they've got so much waste paint being sent their way, they're having to turn it away. It just shows what levels of waste we've got. And typically what happens to paint is, according to these guys, is it's incinerated, or the worst case is that on a construction site they'll take the leftover paint and just tip it upside down on the skip, and it will just contaminate the whole skip, as well as losing a valuable resource. So these guys are using the paint the waste paint as a raw material, so they don't need raw materials, and all it needs is cleaning up. You have to put new preservatives in so that it doesn't smell when you put it onto the wall. And of course, they said what they're getting is they're getting high quality paints from people, because generally people spec the high quality paints, so that's what they get as their raw material. And we're addressing three problems in one go, really. And this is really the vision, I think, for where we could be. You know, in our towns and cities, we could be actually taking a lot more less raw materials into our cities. It's all there. We've processed it and we've created this huge, sort of intense mine, effectively, of materials, and a store of materials that we could be using in the long term. And we've got that stock there. And actually, what we can be doing is we can be reclaiming that and taking advantage of that without having to go out and reprocess loads more and then generate loads of waste. And also the regions outside London are having to deal with all that waste, which we'll come on to in a minute. And you know, an example of how we could be doing this and using digital technology is that this again is still at it's still part of research rather than sort of live. But you know, a couple of people now have been mapping, well, for example, all the bricks in Bradford. So actually, they can tell us how many bricks there are roughly in Bradford, and what type they are, and then you could see that in the future as a time map that you might say, okay, well, we know that this development is going to be demolished for whatever reason, a new infrastructure project or whatever. So we know all the resource that's potentially there that we could reclaim and use elsewhere. So you could see how that would happen at a sort of city level or town level. So that's the circular economy concepts, and I'll just briefly skim through what's happening now with policy, and particularly the London Plan, which, as I'm sure you know, is now adopted. And in there, as proposed originally, there are several policies that relate to circular economy in the built environment. This is just an extract from it, which I was delighted that they used. They asked if they could use my diagram from my book in the London Plan, which is amazingly still in there. So it's a real clear message to me that if you want to get something across, then you need to put it in a nice simple color diagram. Is the best way to get the message across. So that's there. And then there's a circular economy statement guidance, which was published last year in April, and then as a second version in October. And we're working with the JLA now on just dealing with the consultation comments, and the final version will come out later this year. And the whole premise of this is that all referable projects, anything referable to the GLA, has to write a circular economy statement which sets out what commitments they're making and commitments against a series of targets, which is a massive step forward from having nothing around circular economy, only having waste related stuff. And so it's been really interesting to see, and all projects we're seeing loads of projects coming in that are all writing circular economy statements and making these commitments now. So there's two sets of four things that need to happen. Firstly, the applicants have to respond and commit to these four targets locked into policy. So these two, around the 95%, are pretty easy actually, and it shouldn't be a problem. It's just about diverting waste from landfill and making sure that we recycle and recover as much waste as we can. And this is partly to get the commitment, but also partly to start collecting the data, because we don't have that sort of city level view on what's going on these projects. And similarly with excavation waste, which I'll mention a bit later on, but you know, lots of big basements being dug in our cities, but actually it's then it's outside of London where that's got to go. We've got to find beneficial use for that, whether it's golf courses or whatever. It's got to go somewhere, all this stuff. And then another policy target is the 65% of operational waste. So it touches on that, and pushing people to provide and enable buildings to be able to enable the occupants of buildings to be able to separate and recycle more of their operational waste. And then the tricky one is basically encouraging recycle and reuse, as I was talking about earlier, and some of those product ideas, and getting 20% by value of materials actually recycled to start pushing that agenda. So that's the first set of four. The second set of four things is the four tables. So this forms the backbone of a circular economy statement. So I'll just briefly flip through those tables. So in terms of the strategic approach, that is based on this decision tree. And the idea is the top part here is saying, can we refurbish the building? Can we keep it? Can we, if not, can we reclaim some of the residual value from those buildings? So can we reclaim bits of the building and deconstruct and reuse it in some way? And obviously there's a priority towards repurposing, refurbishing over demolishing and recycling. And then in terms of the second part is the new building, and it's sort of saying, well, if you've got these, basically what design principles are you going to build in, circular economy design principles are you going to build into your building, depending on how frequently it's likely to change, both the exterior, the whole purpose of the building, or just the maybe just the interiors, as I was saying about retails and offices having short leases and things. And then this idea that all development should design for disassembly, because however long we think this building is going to be here, it only takes one infrastructure project to flat straight through your site to mean that actually those buildings will be demolished, and if we don't design for that idea of recovery and disassembly, then those resources are going to get downcycled, and we're going to lose all the value, and we're going to be in the same place we are now. So that's table one. So that's how you create table one, and then table two is the one that we use in our workshops and sessions when we're working on live construction projects, and it follows these 9 principles. Very simply, these are about lean design, so using less. Can we use less materials? Can we use less resources? And making sure that what we do use is sourced responsibly and sustainably, so not in a way that would deplete finite resources or knock down loads of forests. The second chunk here is more about the life of the building, about the longevity, adaptability that I was talking about, and also designing out construction waste particularly, but also demolition excavation waste. So can we just not build basements so we don't have to create all that waste, which is also, by the way, has a massive impact on embodied carbon, and something that is being looked at more and more seriously. That the real tricky thing about, if we get rid of well, there's loads of concrete and materials required to make basements, particularly these deep basements, but actually in commercial buildings particularly, they're incredibly useful because they can stick all the stuff down there. So it's a real dilemma, but actually it's something that as the screw tightens on embodied carbon and whole life carbon assessments, we're going to have to be looking at, I think, fundamentally changing the way that we design our buildings. And then the last section is assuming there's some residual waste left, how are you managing that effectively? And that's where the 95% targets and things come in. So that's table 2. Those principles are then mapped out across all of the layers of the building, so the structure, the substructure, and the shell of the building, and everything else, and through to the interiors. And then you basically get the applicants to pick out and talk about the things that they're doing that are the best things that they're doing. And then the third table is the bill of materials, and basically this is saying how much stuff are you using. We're also having, in London, we're having to write this whole life carbon assessment now for major developments, and that is asking very similar. So we normally take the information from that study and put that in here to say how much concrete, how much steel, how much glass, how much aluminium, and all the rest. And then the metrics that we're looking at currently are the kilograms per meter squared. So how heavy is that building per meter squared? So have we designed something that isn't very, very resource intensity, materials intense? There's no target associated with that yet. It's just gathering data and seeing if we can set targets in the future once we have an evidence base, and asking questions. Well, this building is pretty similar to that one, but that uses 20% less materials. What's happened there? Why is that? And then this other one I mentioned earlier about recycled content by value, so encouraging recycled. These optional ones are for pioneering statements, so they're signaling where we'd like people to go in the future, and starting to push more circular economy principles in materials selection. And then, as I said earlier, and the fourth table I'll just come on to is more about you know, what about all these big holes that we're digging? All that stuff is being shipped out to the regions, and that's one of the reasons why the GLA wanted to create a circular economy policy, was in response to the fact that we've just got all this stuff coming out, and we're not able to deal with it typically in our cities. So at the moment we've got this table 4 is asking for tons of materials per meter squared, so an estimate of excavation, demolition and construction waste, and then how is that being treated? Is it reused on site or recycled? Is it off site, or is it going somewhere else? And this has actually been made a little bit more granular now, and actually as we in the next iteration we're going to try and break this down a little bit more so we can see what's going on, and start to gather that data. And I say in the future then we start to be looking at setting targets on that as well. So that's more or less it. So just a note, we've got we've been doing some work with the University of Sheffield, fantastic tool that they've created with us. We sort of put the idea forward, and and they've gone ahead and done it with a couple of their PhD students. So something that we're hoping that we can help develop, and hopefully in the future will be something that will help to demonstrate that a project is more circular. It's answering the question, how circular is your building? Because at the moment it's really hard to say that clearly, because there's so many different metrics and things that we have to look at. And I just want to leave you with a thought that actually, you know, our buildings and our cities are a gold mine of resources. We've spent all this money and effort and time and created all this, you know, damage to the planet to gather them all together into places, and then we're just leaving them, and then we're downcycling and losing their value. And I think this idea of urban mining is the next thing that's coming down the track, where we're going to be looking at where do we get our resources from. We're going to mine them out of our towns and cities, and hopefully keep them within that sort of loop that I was talking about earlier. That's it. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will attempt to answer some questions if we've got any come in.
David, thank you very much for that. It's really interesting. I really like the idea, the concept of looking at cities as a resource for the future, rather than say an obstacle for what we're going to do. We got a few questions in. First one in actually came quite quickly in from Chris Clark. Chris is the Performance and Improvement Director within Scape, and has long been a fan of innovative ideas and certainly the circular economy. The question is, little plug for Scape. Scape clients benefit from call-off contract process that adopts the RIBA 2020 plan of works. How can the circular economy be considered when the project sustainability strategy is developed, please? I think that actually you've probably answered the second part of that, of how is the sustainability strategy considered, because that's, I think, in the 4 tables that you explained at the end of your piece. Maybe it would be good to get a bit of a comment of how that links in with the RIBA 2020 plan of works, please, David.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, there are sort of sustainability overlays, and there are lots of ideas around RIBA plan of work to try and integrate sustainability more into it. And I was part of a really interesting series of sessions recently by ACAN, I can never remember what they're called, Architects Campaign, again, I can't remember. I'll look it up for you. Climate Action Network, Architects Climate Action Network, that's right. And they've got a whole series, and they went through each stage of the RIBA plan of work to say what would you do at each stage to integrate circular economy into it. But for me, I think one of the fundamental things is, like anything that we're trying to do on a project, it's got to be in the brief. So you've got to get it in there right from the start, and then it will cascade through the whole process. And that's true for, you know, energy performance, embodied carbon, cost, you know, structural performance, whatever it is, you know, that the things that we prioritize in the brief, we've got to put that up there as well. And I think one thing that's different about circular economy, and something I think that has to fundamentally change in the way that we procure buildings, is that we've got to think about the supply chain right at the start. And typically what happens is that procurement process is, we write the brief, we get some consultants on board and designers on board, we tender for some contractors, they get some subbies in, they get some specialists in, then somewhere down here, right down the end, we decide what things we're going to use in the building, and then what materials and products and stuff. Actually, I think we've got to flip that, and we've got to start thinking about engaging with the supply chain right from the very start, and we've got to create new ways to engage with people. And I know there's all sorts of public procurement issues and everything, but there are ways of doing this that I think will make for a much more circular outcome.
Great, excellent, thank you. Slightly different slant from Helen Gregory from Brighton and Hove. At what point in the application process is the statement submitted and assessed? Is it planned to be an iterative discussion with the developer architect, and what are the resources needed to assess these statements?
Okay, no, that's a good question. Sorry, I didn't really cover that, so that's really, thanks for that. So yes, so there is at pre-app stage, at the moment, we just say, please, could you write a circular economy statement and broadly tell us what commitments you're going to make. One of the things that has come out from the consultation is that people want more structure to that. So we're going to create a bit more of a structure. And we're thinking at the moment that it might be just around those 9 principles and say, could you respond on each of those and tell us broadly what you're doing? But there's definitely some engagement at pre-app. And then there's you would write an outline circular economy statement for outline applications, and then there's a detailed circular economy statement you'd write for the detailed applications. And yes, the ideally would be an iterative discussion with the developers. It's still bedding in, so I think people are just getting used to it at the moment. But I think that's certainly the intention. In terms of the resources to assess these statements, so there are a team of experts who are like for energy strategies and for biodiversity net gain and all these other things that the GLA is pushing. There are teams of experts who are reviewing the circular economy statements and providing a response to those. And there's usually typically at least two or three rounds on that, where we're saying, yes, got that, but could we have some more detail? Yeah, we're challenging something or whatever. So that's the current case. What we do about that for local authorities, we're still trying to figure out, because actually I think that ideally there would be some expertise behind that. But what I'm hoping ultimately is if we get tools like Regenerate and other things going, that might then shortcut the process and allow, in the way that sort of other building labels do, like BREEAM and things like that, allow local authorities to say, just give us a BREEAM excellent. We don't need to list out energy, water, materials and targets and all that sort of stuff and review this stuff. There's a third party reviewing it, so they can do that. So I think that would be a better scenario in the long term, but certainly in the short term, that's the plan. But ultimately what we're trying to get to is that good and best practice becomes standard practice anyway, so we don't have to start reviewing everything in great detail.
Super, thanks Dave. Next one was from Nick Adlam. Can the cost of re-skinning be cost effective as demolish and rebuild, or do we need to add the cost of carbon in to balance the books?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so I think it is a lot cheaper. I'm not a cost consultant, but I get the understanding it's a lot cheaper to refurb versus new build. I mean, the main issues are on building new are getting out of the ground and all the unknown factors there. But also, I mean, I was just watching a building near our office being demolished. It was a sort of 1960s concrete frame building, and it took them yonks to I must have been over a year to get it down and get all of the existing foundations out of there, and they dug in a massive hole in the ground and loads of effort and time to do that. And also it's quite risky, because that although I know they're very, very safe, but actually watching these diggers actually sitting on top of the building and then demolishing the thing they're standing on looks really quite scary. So I think there's definite benefits to refurb. It's a lot shorter time scale as well, so you can typically, if you've got a building that is ripe for refurbishment, you can get it back on the market much quicker than if you're building new. But in terms of the cost of carbon to balance the books, actually, I was quite surprised to see that. But actually, Landsec and a few others, developers now, are actually including a shadow price of carbon into their or the social cost of carbon, or if that's the phrase, as part of their development calculations internally anyway. So they're doing that internally to say that we want to incorporate this. And there's been some real transformations, I think, in the way some of the big developers are working now. British Land and Landsec particularly, and the Crown Estate, for example, are all really, emphasising circular economy, much lowering their embodied carbon, and the net zero agenda is much stronger.
Great, thanks. One about so the design coding in the NPFF. I'm afraid I don't know what the NPFF is. Seems to be very much aesthetic focus, which is important. But can the materials and the building plans, which are circular, be pushed through design codes? And what is being discussed with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government?
I have to say I don't know much about what's happening at that level. Yeah, I agree. I think planning has traditionally been quite focused on the look and the feel of the buildings, and it's something that we're having discussions with now in our workshops and in pre-app meetings and things like that, to say, actually this isn't just about, if you've got an aluminium facade, you realize that is the highest, aluminium is like the highest embodied carbon impact facade you could have picked. Actually, this is going to be this is a problem. So I think it's just, at the moment, it's really it seems to be mainly circular economy coming through planning policy in our cities, and I think there's a sort of focus in London that I'm seeing. I don't know if there are discussions with CLG, but as I say, it seems to be very much a planning related issue, and I think local and regional planning is probably a really good place for it to sit. I'm just really delighted that it's happening, really. I think just starting to see it happening, and hopefully we can get some lessons out to people about how we can lessons learned and disseminate that more widely over the next couple of years.
Great. Someone else thinks it's a great idea, likes the idea about the goldmine of materials built into cities. But is there a requirement for local authorities to review their current buildings to refurb before granting permission to build new?
Yeah, this is a really good point, because actually, I think well, ideally yes, but I'm not sure if local authorities have got the power to do that. I mean, I think because we're kicking in at the planning stage, the decision to refurb or build new has already been made at that point, because what I'm hoping is that there's going to be pressure back up the decision-making process. So as developers and landowners get to realise that they're going to be asked some serious questions about why are you not refurbishing this building, and not every site and building is right for refurbishment. And we've seen lots of projects where you've got a single story, really poor quality industrial unit, let's say, with an asbestos cement roof, and it's pretty much falling down, and you think, well, actually there's probably lots more we could be doing with this site, and I think that's fair enough. Doesn't mean we can't reclaim the bits of it apart from the asbestos, but actually, if there's more interrogation and more emphasis on that as starting to happen, then what I hope is that people who are procuring sites will start to think, oh, hang on, there's a really good quality building on this. Then either I'm not going to do that because I want to build something completely different, or I will actually refurbish this and put that application forward instead of demolishing and starting again. So I think that is an important step that I'd like to see starting to happen. And I think, to be honest, with the net zero agenda, I don't think we have got much choice. And if developers, as developers, are realizing and landowners, universities and all the rest are all going, oh crumbs, we've got to get to net zero by 2030, including the embodied carbon impacts of what they're doing in that, means that actually they can't be pouring loads of concrete and procuring loads of steel and extruding loads of aluminium all the time. It's just not going to fit within their envelope of carbon emissions.
Okay, great, thanks. We've probably got time for just a couple more questions. There actually a couple came in from Chris Clark again, so I'll combine them because I think there's a similar theme in them. first part A then is there a client forum to sort of discuss how circular economy can be adopted? And then also, is there, say, an open source website for circular economy practical tips, and to spotlight some of the great products that you've started to showcase in your piece, David?
Yeah, so yeah, that's something we need more of. I mean, I'm just writing down. I mean, because I'm not sure I forget otherwise. But there's three examples I can come up with. I mean, London are doing a lot of work now. They used to be called LWARB, London Waste and Resources. Now they're called London, and they're running in conjunction with several other partners. They're running the Circuit project, and that is turning out a lot of material at the moment, and looking at case studies, examples, and pulling all that sort of stuff together. So I think that's going to be a very important one. The GLA have got some stuff on their landing page around circular economy. So they put forward a primer, which was a circular economy primer for clients, which is really just to get people up to speed a little bit with that. And I think that'll be developed and progressed. And relating to that, I know that London are working with GLA to collate more guidance and more case studies for the GLA as well, and create links to that. And I think they're creating a wiki they talked about as well. So I think a circular economy wiki, which sounds a great idea. And also there's the UK Green Building Council, and they've got several publications now on things like using salvage materials and reclaimed materials, and actually a little bit more practical about how you do it. And actually I found that really useful, and I've used that on a project to help me try and write specification clauses for demolition contractors and for contractors about how we're going to reclaim stuff, because it just hasn't been done very much. So it is quite difficult. So I think we're all learning as we go, really. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks. And final question, I think, from David Hutt. We thought great presentation, David. So you can never have too many Davids on the presentation. So for David Hutt, what one thing could we all do now to move the dial toward a circular economy?
Yeah, there is no one thing, is there? Get it in the brief, I think. Very boring question, but a very boring answer, sorry, but and a rather short one. So talk with just one thing. I mean, I've listed out a whole load of things I think we can do, and I think but getting it in the brief for a project, even better if we get it in the strategy for landowners, for owners of portfolios, for developers, to say we need to develop a circular economy strategy for our organization and how we work. And then that will trickle into individual projects. Because I think one of the problems is when you're trying to do it on a live project, there's lots of network opportunities, there's lots of suppliers, brokers, and people that we probably should be engaging with, but there isn't really the time to test those things and do those things on a live construction project when you've got a fixed deadline and you've got a fixed budget. So if we can come back a step and say, right, this insulation product I've talked about looks really interesting. Why don't we test that out on another construction site? We'll just stick up a sample of it, for 6 months, see how it looks. We will do all the due diligence on it. We'll get BRE to set fire to it and all those other things and test it all out. And then when we get to a live project, we've got we're then saying, hey, we're confident we can do this now. Because one of the problems we've got in the construction industry is we don't like anything new, and quite often with good reason. But I've often asked about, what's the innovative new thing that we can do, Dave? And it's like, I say, what about this? What about this? Well, well, tell me where it's been used before. I go, well, that's the point. It's innovative. You asked me, so it's new. It hasn't been tried before. Someone has to try it first, and to do that, I mean, I think Landsec were really interesting in the way that they've been looking at the Forge building, for example, where they set up a parallel design team with their live design team and actually tested a whole new way of building a building right down from the structural basic perspective, to use less embodied carbon, to use less resources, to be quicker, to be higher quality, and all those sorts of things. And they did it basically almost like a research project alongside, which they then brought into the live project. And I think that's the sort of stuff we're gonna have to do to make this work.
Great, David. Really super time. Been absolutely fascinating, certainly for my part, and I hope everybody else has thought the same. from a session, I think sort of you brought sort of the three key things. It's, you know, so it's a really fascinating subject, really well presented and eloquently, and thank you for that. And also stuck to time, so that all helps. That all helps as well. If there are any other questions that you think out after this session, then I think feel free to contact us. You've got David Cheshire's contacts there on maybe on the screen in front of you, or on the Scape website. So you will be able to contact there Chris Clark or Vanessa Good, who is the relationship manager for the Southeast, or within Perfect Circle on the Perfect Circle website with either Hannah Hamilton, David Hutt, or myself, David Staniforth. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.